My name is Myra Spencer, and I'm 35. The fluorescent lights of St. Catherine's Hospital buzzed overhead as I made my way down the third-floor corridor, my white coat brushing against my scrubs and a tablet of patient charts tucked beneath my arm. It was a Tuesday afternoon, the kind that melted into every other Tuesday I'd worked since the divorce, filled with rounds, paperwork, and the quiet fulfillment of a job that demanded nothing but my confidence. In the 12 months since Adrian and I signed the papers, I'd pieced my life back together from the ground up, and most days, he didn't cross my mind. That changed the moment I rounded the corner near the cardiology waiting area and saw her. Veronica Cole sat in one of the vinyl chairs, her purse clenched in her lap like a barrier, and the instant her gaze locked onto me, her entire demeanor shifted. She rose slowly, smoothing her blazer, and that familiar smile crept across her face, the same one she'd wear at family dinners just before delivering a cutting remark. I hadn't laid eyes on her since the day I moved out of the house Adrian and I shared on Birchwood Lane, and clearly, a year hadn't dulled a single edge of hers. "Myra," she said, stretching my name out as if she were tasting it. "Well, isn't this a surprise? Still playing doctor here, are we?" I kept my expression neutral, the same look I used when a patient's relative tried to bait me into an argument I had no time for. "Veronica, I didn't know you came to this hospital." "My sister's having a procedure," she replied, waving a hand dismissively, as if the actual reason for her visit was secondary to the conversation she was itching to have. She stepped closer, and I caught the familiar scent of her perfume, the same sharp, floral, faintly overwhelming fragrance she'd worn for all 15 years I'd known her. "But I have to say, running into you like this feels almost like fate. I've been wanting to tell you something for a long time." I didn't ask what. I'd learned long ago that Veronica didn't need an invitation. "Leaving you was the best decision my son ever made," she said, her voice pitched loud enough for the waiting room to catch, yet soft enough to pretend it was private. "Now he has a baby boy with your best friend." There it was, the thing she'd clearly been holding on to for a year, polished and rehearsed, delivered with the satisfaction of someone convinced they were setting off a bomb. I thought of Olivia, of our college years as roommates, of the bridesmaid dress she wore at my wedding, of the calls that stopped coming 6 months before my marriage ended, and the reason I never fully understood until much later. I considered how I was supposed to feel, hearing this news from a woman who'd never hidden her disdain for me. And what I actually felt, standing there in my white coat with a chart still under my arm, was nothing like what Veronica expected. "Is that what you believe?" I said. It wasn't sharp. It wasn't even particularly loud. But something in my tone made her smile waver, just slightly, as if she'd anticipated tears or anger, and got neither. She blinked, recalibrating, opening her mouth to say something else, something to sharpen the blade she thought she'd already sunk in. "I just think you should know what you lost," she pressed on, though the confidence in her voice had thinned. "A grandson, a real family, everything you couldn't give him." I didn't respond right away. I glanced past her at the clock on the wall, then back at her face, at the lines around her mouth that deepened when she was pleased with herself. Patients shuffled past in wheelchairs. A nurse called a name over the intercom. Life moved on around us, and for a moment, I almost pitied her for all the energy she'd poured into constructing a moment she thought would destroy me. "You should get back to your sister," I said finally, stepping aside to pass her. That's when the door at the end of the corridor opened. A man walked through, tall, dressed in a charcoal suit rather than scrubs, carrying himself with the kind of quiet authority that made the nurses near the station straighten without realizing it. He scanned the hallway once, and then his eyes found mine, and something in his face softened in a way that had nothing to do with hospital protocol. "Myra," he said, closing the distance between us in a few easy strides. Veronica's had snapped toward him, and I watched recognition hit her in real time, watched the color drain from her face, as if someone had pulled a plug beneath her skin. Her mouth opened, but for the first time since I'd known her, no words came out. Julian reached me first, his hand settling on the small of my back in a gesture so natural it barely registered as a gesture at all, just the easy rhythm of two people who had learned each other's spaces. "Sorry I'm late," he said, glancing at his watch. The board meeting ran long. Dr. Whitfield wouldn't stop talking about the new wing. "You're fine," I said, and something in my voice must have carried more than I intended, because his eyes flicked toward Veronica, taking in her frozen expression, the purse still clutched against her chest like it might shield her from whatever was unfolding. "Mrs. Cole," he said, his tone polite but unmistakably formal, the kind of formal that comes from familiarity rather than distance. "I didn't expect to see you here." Veronica's mouth opened and closed twice before anything came out. "Julian," she finally managed, the name sounding foreign in her mouth, as if she were testing its truth. "You two know each other?" "We're getting married in the spring," I said simply. And I watched the words land on her like a slow-moving wave, watched her try to reconcile the image she'd built of me, divorced and discarded and presumably alone, with the reality standing before her. But that wasn't what made her face lose its color. That came a few seconds later, when Julian turned to me and said, almost as an afterthought, "I meant to call you earlier. The audit on coal industries came back this morning. We found enough discrepancies in the quarterly filings to bring it to the full board tonight." I felt Veronica go rigid beside me before I even fully grasped what he meant. "Coal industries," she repeated, her voice thin. "You're talking about my husband's company, Adrian's company." Julian glanced at her, and I could see him recalculating, realizing the conversation he'd thought was background noise had just become deeply personal to the woman standing 3 feet away. "I run capital allocation for the firm that holds the majority stake," he said carefully. "We've had concerns about the books for months. This morning, we confirmed there's been money moved out of client accounts that shouldn't have been touched. Adrian's name is attached to most of the transfers." The waiting room around us seemed to go quiet, though I knew it hadn't, not really. I just couldn't hear anything past the sound of Veronica's breathing, sharp and uneven. The sound of a woman watching her son's entire life unravel in real time, delivered by the same calm, unhurried voice that had just told me about a board meeting running long. "That's not possible," she said, but there was no conviction in it anymore. "Adrian wouldn't. He's careful. He's always been careful with money." "I'm sorry," Julian said, and he meant it, because that was who he was, kind even when delivering news that would have made other men gloat. "There's a meeting tonight to decide what happens next. I'd imagine he'll be hearing from legal before the day's over." I thought about Olivia then, about the life Veronica had described to me with such relish only minutes earlier. The baby boy, the happy little family that was supposed to prove I'd been the problem all along. I wondered if Olivia knew yet. I wondered how long that happiness would last once the accounts were frozen, and the lawyers started calling and the company that funded their entire lifestyle collapsed under the weight of whatever Adrian had been hiding. "I should go," Veronica said abruptly, color still drained from her face, her composure cracking at the edges in a way I had genuinely never witnessed before. She turned without saying goodbye, walking quickly toward the elevators, her heels clicking unevenly against the tile. I didn't feel triumphant watching her go. That surprised me more than anything else that had happened in the last 10 minutes. I'd spent so long imagining what it would feel like to see her humbled, and now that it had actually occurred, all I felt was a quiet, settled peace, the kind that comes from realizing you no longer need someone else's downfall to feel whole. "You okay?" Julian asked, turning to face me fully, his hand finding mine. "I am," I said, and for the first time in a long while I meant it completely. A year ago, I'd stood in a courtroom signing papers that ended a marriage I thought would last my whole life, and I'd wondered, in the quiet moments after, whether I'd ever feel steady again. I hadn't expected the answer to arrive in a hospital hallway, delivered by a woman who'd spent 15 years believing I was the disappointment in her son's life. But there it was, undeniable, standing right in front of me in the shape of everything I'd rebuilt without even realizing I was building it. Adrian's mother had wanted me to feel small that day. Instead, I walked out of that hospital corridor with Julian's hand in mine, lighter than I'd felt in years, finally understanding that the best revenge isn't the one you plan.